So we're here to talk through this crosses streams LITS variation. My goal in constructing it started from very much having 3 clues, particularly asterisk clues, with these center 4s up top and even 2 more center 4s on the side. And admittedly, that's a fairly constrained path, and so you'll see a lot of the start of this puzzle is just crosses streams logic, but we eventually hit some LITS logic to get through to the end. So let's see how the solving path was meant to go. One thing in any puzzle like this with large groups, particularly on edges, is that some of these larger numbers will influence where the large group can go. A group like a 4 can't cross both of these cells because it would form a 2 by 2 box coming to the right, and so there's a kind of mental block of where the 4 can go here and a mental block of where the 4 can go here. And actually I started this puzzle with these numbers and not yet ones and question marks here in a symmetric way. They started as unknowns. But at the very start of this puzzle, without looking at anything else, you can mark that this is the 4 tall region in the first column. It's going to start to prime a 3-cell block to its right, a 2-cell block to its right, down here, 2 unused spaces. An observation, we need to fit 4 more cells in, which are either these 4 or potentially both, but you'll see if you shaded this cell, it immediately from the clue to the left would form a 2 by 2 block, and so the 4 in the next column is down here. It takes 3 to the right, unused cell forces 2 to the left, unused cell forces 1 more to the right. We've got all of these in the grid, got the start of an S. One thing, although it's not really critical in this puzzle at this moment, is to actually think about how the tetrominoes break apart. And one way I do this mentally is to start to actually look at a situation like if I don't use an edge as part of a LITS shape, what is it putting into the grid? I see I have an S here, so I do want to dodge, for instance, this S, which means I need to take this cell and this cell and connect them as part of a group, because if this were disconnected, I form an S near an S. Similarly, if this cell isn't used, I form this S right on top of an S, so I know I do this. This could be the end of a group, or it could take 1 more cell, but you'll see that if it doesn't take this cell, we form an L near another L. And so this isn't actually critical at this time in the puzzle, but it is something we can be marking in general, are some of these shapes as they come in. What you can do, though, at this time of the puzzle is continue the cross-LITS steps of putting in the 4 large groups. There has to be at least this second cell of these total 6, and down here there are 5 cells, in the middle 3 will have to be part of this 4, however else the rest of things go. We're now a little bit at a stage by shading this cell where we can get some help over here. We need to place these horizontal 4s in this group, and that's probably going to be somewhat limiting. Another thing we can start to think about is now this side of the grid, and here we have a question mark, sort of an unused space, 4 cells, unused space, and 1. And in a typical crosses streams, you can start by just saying how high can this be and how low can this be. And so if this is shaded, unshaded, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is how high the lowest cell in this group can be. And if I do 1 unshaded, 1, 2, 3, 4 shaded, this is as low as the topmost cell of this group can be. So long way of getting to the fact that these 2 middle cells must be part of the shaded 4 when this is a clue pattern. We have to still place a 4 in this group, but the 4 will have an unshaded space and then 1, 2, 3, 4 cells used. That again sort of limits where there are really 6 cells in contention, these to be the leftmost and rightmost parts of necessary groups of this 4. So this gets shaded to have a 4 with something to its right, and this 4 clue now can't be over to the left. It has to not shade both of these cells, and so it has these 5 cells to use. It's got to actually take exactly these 4 because this was already shaded. This can't be used. This becomes unusable. This 4 now has to come over at least 1 more cell because it can't take both of these. That marks this off. Get a little more shape in the grid now as a consequence. We have a few things we can do over here. I think the first is to look at this big 4. It's got to be the first group in this region. We now have a shaded block, and you can see because you can't get all the way to the top cell and shade 4 before touching this, that the 4 of these 4 cells, there's a 2 down here somewhere. The 4 in this group can't be anywhere near the top now because it would form 2 by 2 boxes again, so its topmost cell could be here, 1, 2, 3, 4, coming up from the bottom. These 2 cells add into this third as a necessary part of that shape. The 4 up top now can't be, the 4 in this column, sorry, can't take these cells, so it has to take at least 2 of the cells here. It could be all the way at the top or near the bottom, but this will be part of that shape. We actually can use this clue, it looks like horizontally. You sometimes miss in cross the streams when you can look back and forth, but there's some start I can do by doing that. That actually gives us these, which will help this go faster. The 4 in this column now only has the bottom space to use, and with this cell already part of it, that cell is part of the 4, not these. This now, marked unused, forces the last shaded cell up top. Question mark still has to be in the grid somewhere, so it's up here. The first thing from the side is 3 long, so that's these. This has to stay connected to the grid, so these are shaded. So we now have another good starting point to mark tetrominoes in, which is starting from this corner. And this is the actual key one. It's going to feed down to this corner and limit the tetrominoes that remain. Got an isolated alley, so we know those are part of a group. If we, going back to some of the stuff I said down here, if we don't have this being part of a shared tetramino, it's going to form an L here, and it's going to form another L here. We'll have 3 L's touching, so that's no good. This has to be part of it. If this isn't used, it forms an L this way, so these 3 come together, run into this group that now is forced to be an I. This is an S. We should now do some stuff down here. 4 followed by nothing and then an unused group, so there is no other cell until you get out to the 4. We have 1 here, so we'll mark that off. And we have to take 1 more cell in this group, and it can't be down here, so we have to take this. So we have a little bit of a start of some groups in the puzzle. One first thing you can see at this point is if you don't take this cell, we actually don't know if this is shaded. One of the neat things about this variation is you can sometimes force shading based in tetramino tiling. If this isn't used or isn't part of at least this tetramino, we form this L. We form these 3 cells and either of these to form another L. And so we know right away that this is both shaded and part of this group. That actually means that this and this are part of a group. If this comes down and takes this cell, forming an L, it's now near another L, so this is off limits. You could say, can we shade all the way across, but we have a 1 here on this row, and so whatever we put in the space first has to take single channels in what it's doing. One thing that actually tells me, which is, well, let's go back and just mark what we said. We said this can't be used. First, we do have to still place this 1 clue somewhere in the space. If it were here, it's got to immediately go up. If it's here, it's got to immediately go up. If it's here, it's got to immediately go up. But we have problems with 2 of these 3 options. There's a 1 up here, so we would have a single cell in the row and a single cell in the column that would be isolated. In this case, we'd have a single cell that can come up, but it forms a group of size 5, and we need a group of size 4. So the deduction you can force from the grid is that these 2 cells are the ones that respond for this clue. You can ask now, does this come over to the right? If it doesn't come to the right, it comes all the way to here. It forms another L. We've got an L here. That's no good. So it's got to at least come to this place on the right. That now actually means this isn't used. We could have probably known that before. If this cell is shaded, it forms a T. That now forces this to be a T. We can actually mark that in. This T and L are very much forced. So not used. Get this S. We've got a tetramino. It's going to grow out from the cell and force us to shade to the left. So LITS packing gets us this I. LITS packing might help here now. This 4's got to stop. This has to then be the last cell for the row. Got a group coming up here, a group coming here. This has to come over, at least 1. This has to come up, 1 more, and actually to fill out this 4 clue, it's got to take these. This actually has got to be a terminal cell for this, so that S tetramino shape is forced. This T is forced. This I is forced, and we don't have room for another tetramino. So all we have to do is finish out the grid over here. And a thing to note is we've got to take a single cell. We could have actually done this at the start. Take a single cell from this column, take a single cell from a row, But a cell we can't take is this corner cell because we'd isolate a single cell in those two spaces. And so the last thing to do up here is to take these cells and mark the T. So a different kind of variation. It probably was a little lighter on the LITS steps than I would have wanted, but it was very much forced by these foursomes in the columns and in the rows. As you saw, as you got to get some of the placements, particularly in this corner, you could start to use tetromino placements and doing this kind of counterfactual. If I don't take this group, what does a tetromino look like? If I do take the group, what does it mean? And getting even 2 or 3 cells connected as small little groups helps you break apart the shapes to get the rest of the grid solved. So hope you enjoyed hearing more about this puzzle, and we'll see you again soon.